Hi everyone, I'm Visura. I was the past debate team captain of Elizabeth Moy School, and currently I'm the debate coach of Royal College Colombo and Lyceum International School, Vattala. So today I'm here to debrief the motion of the fourth round of the Vijitha Weerasinghe Memorial Challenge Trophy, and the motion reads: This House, as the Debaters Council of Sri Lanka, would implement the Mandatory Adjudicator Fee Policy instead of the Institutional Adjudicator Fee Policy. For someone who is unfamiliar with this motion, a bit of context. So the Adjudicator Fee Policy is basically, instead of the current policy, which is the Institutional Fee Policy, where each institution, based on the amount of teams they bring into a tournament, they are supposed to allocate like an institutional edge to judge on behalf of their team. And the current quota is basically you judge 3 rounds on behalf of the team you represent. In contrast, this adjudicator fee policy is basically there will be no mandatory quota to be met by an institutional adjudicator, but rather each institution, as they represent themselves, they will have to pay a certain amount of fee to enter, and in return, every adjudicator who participates to adjudicate these rounds in this tournament will be compensated by a particular fee. So that is like ideally like the context behind what is the comparative to what's existing right now. So basically, then we have two teams, obviously, prop and op. So how would prop approach this motion? Um, I think prop, at least I would approach this motion in terms of a cultural zeitgeist, in the sense to kind of go back as to what debating was before, and then what debating is right now, to paint some context as to why this adjudication fee policy is so needed right now. Because basically, if you go pre-COVID, you can argue that there was a sort of culture of giving back. There were stronger fraternities among schools, and like basically like the alumni network is much more stronger with the existing students who are participating in tournaments and existing students who are debating. So earlier you would see basically your own alumni coming to coach you back, which is not the case right now. Right now you have coaches outsourced to coach for you, and the same culture does not particularly exist. And also there's a more isolating culture where the kind of prestige to adjudicating has kind of died out, and that can be attributed to like a couple of reasons. One is the entire idea of like the circuit itself coming a bit closer, and like the circuit kind of fraternizing with each other. That made the idea that now, because everyone is familiar with each other, the kind of comfort, so the kind of overall comfort you have with each and every one kind of was higher, which meant that then the stakes itself felt much less, because the stakes of losing or the stakes of winning did not feel as much, which like in a, like in some sense may be a good thing, but for this motion it is a crucial point to note, because this means that then the overall prestige of winning a tournament or taking part is much less, because you don't feel the intensity as you felt it before, because you are much more familiar with this crowd. This means then um, that in terms of the prestige, as it goes down, now basically adjudicators itself feel less inclined to come even for out rounds, come for rounds like octofinals, quarterfinals even, because they don't feel the need to stay there anymore, because it's not this grand position anymore. The other reason is that a lot of adjudicators, um, after their A levels, are migrating abroad for higher studies. This also particularly attributes to the financial crisis and how there's like a stronger trend to go abroad for your higher studies. This means that then a lot of quality adjudicators, or like a lot of alumni in the local debating network, have been outsourced abroad. This means then is that there is only a limited amount of adjudicators who are actually interested in adjudicating local tournaments, and even that is slowly dying down. Which means then is that because the past incentives which existed, which could be stake, which could be uh, which could be the culture of wanting to give back and feeling guilty if you don't, because those stuff like attribute to these adjudicators currently much less, you need another incentive to boost their reason to come back. And that incentive can be a monetary incentive, which is quite valid, because you do see that basically currently that adjudicators do turn up if they are coaching a school. That is because there is a trend where you would want to coach a school afterwards, which means that there is a financial incentive which is kind of keeping you in the circuit. That is one. And two is basically also you can also attribute to the financial crisis and afterwards how a lot of people straight after school are also working part-time jobs to kind of build pocket money for them. This means then that this idea that financial incentive can also drive you exists. Considering that, then this motion is viable because that means that this because this particular model can actually be feasible in the current network. So that is, I think, an overall way on how you can attribute to feasibility. Another way you can actually push in prop is in terms of accountability, where the current circuit not only lacks adjudicators but lacks accountability on adjudicators. The problem as such is that people turn up late, or people cancel last minute in terms of rounds, and this puts a huge strain on organizers, and even it's actually unfair on teams where they have have like last minute replacements overall. And the best way to hold adjudicators accountable is to give them financial incentive, because if they don't, they won't get paid, or they'll be paid less. Now, because of that, people are more inclined to actually turn up on time or actually even stay. This means then that not only accountability is ensured, but also to make sure that actually people stay for longer. That the incentive for you to stay for longer hours, for you to stay for more rounds, even beyond a particular quota, which like this institutional quota may have met, is existent in this case, because the more rounds you edge, the more you earn. So there's a greater ROI, and because of that, I think people are more likely to kind of invest in the circuit more. And then that entire culture of adjudicators also turning up could increase. Then finally, the other potential prop push is in terms of principle, to say that the existence, like the current system where adjudicators kind of come for tournaments, even though it is to meet an institutional quota, is in part unfairly outsourced labor. The reason is such is that sure, they may be, so even if you are representing an institution, and even though you may be coaching a school, not every judge who comes to adjudicate on behalf of the institution is being paid to be there. What that means is basically there is no culture in which or an establishment or an agreement each person can actually make with their schools to claim that these tournaments also consume my time on behalf of your school, and hence I need to be compensated by a financial payment. Not every adjudicator is fairly compensated in that way, and hence, because they have no alternative and because they want to also maintain their job, they do turn up for these tournaments and they waste a lot of their time. So considering that, you exploit the fact that these young people straight after school who want to maintain a buck in their pocket, you kind of exploit them in that fact that they want to maintain this job and they want to maintain what they have going for them, and you kind of push that in terms of giving them a mandatory institutional quota. And by that virtue then, that it is fundamentally exploitative and hence it's unjust. So, I mean, because the easiest thing to prove there is that the comparative is far better. Why? Because the comparative assumes that you don't have to meet this quota and actually you will be compensated. Every adjudicator will be compensated ultimately. So that makes sure that there is no fundamental exploitative structure being existent in the system. Okay. Now, then in contrast, what can potentially run in this debate? I think a couple of lines. So firstly is the most obvious line that if you put an institutional quota, not everyone can afford it, right? And this comes down to basically rural schools or basically schools that aren't as established, seeing this financial investment where like you would have to invest an amount of cash to participate in these tournaments as not worth it, because these teams, because now it hurts the most vulnerable teams, the teams which aren't the most likely or aren't going to break factually, are the ones who are going to not take part anymore, because they see that the participation is not enough for them to invest in it. And also considering that Sri Lanka has a frugal culture because of the culture of free education and whatnot, means that then to even convince your parents to pay on behalf of you is going to be quite hard. And then parents also won't be as incentivized if there is a participation fee compared to if it was completely free, where there is no added cost beyond your time. And in that case, your time is seen as an investment because you are going to improve in the long run. But here, it is going to be a financial investment, and that won't be attributed to like improvement or time overall. This hurts the whole perception of debating itself, but also hurts the most vulnerable teams who want to participate. Sorry, I got cut off in the middle. Now, moving on to my second opposition point, which is basically Pandora's box. This is say that now, once you basically open this culture of payment and financial compensation, this is going to be the kind of ethos of how the circuit functions. This is particularly hard for the actor of this motion, being the Debaters Council, because it kind of purely functions on voluntary work and basically functions in the gift economy. That is, say that basically people volunteer themselves, their time, and themselves as resources for the DC, and basically like the whole incentive there is that it is CV work and work for them, and that they perceive that as an investment. But that is because the existent culture is as such. The alternative is far worse, because now once you show that there is financial compensation, that is going to be the existent way people will expect it, and then like it is more like people are most likely going to call out the DC as well for not paying them, because that is the kind of ethos which is kind of like, changing after you introduce this new mandatory fee policy, to say that if you place this burden on organizers, on teams, why aren't you placing this burden on yourself? And that will be a fair question people will be like, basically people in the circuit will be asking the DC. This is a huge burden for the DC, because it is basically not something they are used to, and also not something in their principal line of work, because the DC does a lot of volunteer work where they go for outreach programs and actually introduce debating to outreach schools and whatnot, which is a huge, like, which basically, if they had to charge an amount or a fee from schools for that, these types of investments in debating across the island won't be happening, because basically once you put a financial block onto what you provide as a service, people are less likely to invest, especially schools, and especially in a system like Sri Lanka where free education is the norm. So it is not conducive at all in the Sri Lankan system itself for the DC to actually continue the work they are doing, and that is actually going to hurt basically all the good work the DC is doing right now, which is hugely detrimental to them. Finally, then, is the idea that you're going to have less tournaments overall, because this can go in a few ways, right? If you have to continue having tournaments, that means that you would have to pay your adjudicators, and for people to participate in your tournament, you need to make sure that you ask a decent amount from the teams to make sure that you can pay off the adjudicators. But not every school has the leverage to do this. If a less established school is planning on organizing a tournament and they ask this amount as an entrance fee, the chances of people actually participating in this tournament is far less. And because turnout is going to be much less, then these unestablished or less established schools are less incentivized to organize this, because the turnout is going to be less. The other alternative is going to be that even if you have more tournaments and assume that people are still incentivized to organize, it is going to be less turnout overall and less participation. The reason as such is that, again, as we already previously mentioned, considering the frugal culture in Sri Lanka, people, after a couple of tournaments in the year, your parents aren't going to be okay with it, because you are not only spending time outside your education because of the huge academic culture in Sri Lanka, but you are also spending their money on participating in this tournament. So that means the amount of tournaments you can participate per year is going to be much, much less, and also that is assuming that people actually participate at all at some scale, because some teams might actually not participate at all, and that is a huge opportunity cost you will have to bear in mind. So considering that, then that is also a net harm, because then the amount of investment people put, because basically people grow each tournament, and if your chance to grow is obstructed, then potential future good debaters may not be culminated, because they don't have the time or capacity to grow, because either their parents aren't okay, or B, they themselves aren't okay with the fact that they have to pay for this. So then you can actually show that this, like, the whole culture of debate is going to change, and how it's going to change, right? Then who can actually access debating ultimately? Who can actually pay for all these tournaments, even like in props based case? That is to frame that then it is going to be some elite culture like the MUN in Sri Lanka, where only elite schools kind of consistently participate, or even if it's particular people participating in government schools, it is going to be either like the major government schools, and even among them it is going to be the people who can afford participating in events like this. And the problem there is basically you are putting like a financial cap to how many people can participate, right? Because ultimately, if a team is to register and pay an amount, it comes down to who can pay that amount and who is willing to pay that amount. So then that also is unfair as a system, because debating especially in a school level should be accessible to all, and that is the culture we've grown up in Sri Lanka. So that is a huge failure the Debaters Council is doing, especially because their current principles are tied to outreach work and whatnot, and tied to allowing and creating greater access to debating. So these are the two potential cases prop and op can run. And I think clashes come down to what is easier for less established schools. Because in terms of prop, they can say that less established schools to even participate an institutional adjudicator for a tournament, they don't have a strong alumni network itself, or the fact that also less established schools have less committed coaches on their side because they aren't as good basically, and like basically coaches are less incentivized to even keep their jobs potentially compared to op. They can say that all the less established schools are less likely to participate overall. That is one. Then the whole principle of like props unfairness, contrasting to op, saying that like again it is an extension of the previous idea, but to say that basically it's unfair because yes, so this was a potential idea I missed, but also the idea that everyone will be paid the same. This is to say that basically if everyone is paid the same amount, that is unfair for the debate, like for the adjudicators, at least in their debating career, put more work into what they're doing, or the adjudicators who are much more established. Because you can't pay them more. It has to be an equal amount to make sure that there is equal participation among all adjudicators, because ultimate goal is to cover all the rounds on both sides, right? So then, because considering that is the ultimate goal, to achieve that basically then both sides have to pay the adjudicators equally. Then why does op have a case in this current context is because then it is unfair for the adjudicators who A, put in more work and have established themselves, and B, the adjudicators who were once debaters who have put in more work to improve and hone their debating skills. And basically like the compensation for like their hard work is not met, and that is a principal unfairness there. So those are the two then contrasting ways prop and op can clash in terms of principle. So hope this was helpful, and see you.